Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me on this Friday, February 3rd in the Locher Room. I'm Alan Locher. Joining me today is the creator and writer of the daily podcast serial, The Homos of Harmony Way, Andrew Schulz. Andrew began writing at the age of 7 due to his love of soap operas and the classic Doctor Who. He followed their format by writing every story as a serial. After a 20-year detour as an actor in both theater and television, he received his master's degree from the Actor Studio Drama School, where he was encouraged to create his own stories. When battling mental illness, he found himself unable to continue his creative life on stage and returned to his roots of writing, using many of the techniques he'd learned at the Actor Studio. The Homos of Harmony Haven began as an idea in 2017, and he released it in a daily written format in 2020. Now, even as he's releasing the 4th year of the series in 2023 to the readers, he's also recording the 3rd year's chapters and releasing them as a daily podcast serial audiobook. Andrew is also actively working to end the stigma of mental illness by speaking openly about whenever possible to help educate others, as he's been educated over the past 5 years by going through it himself. He will share that personal story with you today. Please help me welcome this talented writer and mental health activist, Andrew Schulz, to the Locher Room. Andrew, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. After watching so many of these throughout the pandemic, it's weird to be on the other side to be interviewed. Thank you so much for being me on.
Well, I appreciate you watching, and my best friend and your husband connected us.
Yes, like as you said, I think when you wrote, it's a small world. It's
it really
big city, but a small world.
It really is. And George, my best friend, connected us because of our mutual love of soap operas.
Sure.
And, take me back. Who introduced you to soaps, and what soaps were they?
So my mom was a single mother and was a teacher. So once I was in kindergarten and first grade, I think both those years you don't go a full day. So my grandmother was who would pick me up from school and babysit me afterwards until my mother got, because she taught 3rd and 4th grade, so she had the full day. And my grandmother had her stories, and All My Children was her big one. So I've done research on YouTube because the first thing I remember is Lars and Daisy and the Locket. And so I found out I started watching that at 6 years old. And I watched All My Children until 1987. I was in high school. I watched that all my whole life. I can't believe my parents let me watch sometimes. I mean, it's a soap. I remember sometimes being so freaked out, like when people were on, what was her name? Liza Colby. Liza was on drugs, and the scream was so weird. And I'm like 8 years old going, oh my gosh, that's so strange.
Was Liza Colby Marcy Walker?
Marcy, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So big fan of All My Children. And then, interestingly enough, because I didn't know this, I wasn't actively aware yet that I was a homosexual, as Suzanne Sugarbaker would say. But I had the biggest crush on Lawrence Lau, who was Greg on that show. Yeah. And he'd left this show, and I probably reading Soap Opera Digest, because at some point I saw he was on Another World as Jamie Frame, and I was like, he's on another show? I was like, well, I have to watch that show because I was like, I love him. So I started watching Another World, and I watched the two for a while, but I was in high school and you're doing theater at night, and eventually I was like, I can't watch 2 hours of soap opera every day. And sadly, All My Children lost me, and I jumped over to Another World.
Oh, okay. I love that. I mean, I don't know if I started at 6. They were definitely on in my household because my mother learned to speak English watching As the World Turns and Guiding Light. But I don't know if I was, dedicated at 6, but I was dedicated by definitely early teens. Definitely. And as we were talking about, John Wesley Shipp probably was, around that time for me. So,
yeah, no, I can remember. It would be 6. The woman who played Daisy on All My Children played Jennifer Ryan. No, Ryan. Yeah, on she played Kim's sister. Uh,
Okay.
on As the
Oh,
World.
Gillian Spencer.
Jillian Spencer. Yes, she was now with Daisy, and she was supposed to be with Palmer. And Lars was this evil guy, and we all knew he was evil. And there was something about a locket, and they had to find him. And all I remember, I'm so young, I remember watching it live, on TV, and he was getting ready to kill her and like throw her off the balcony, and it goes to commercial break. And my little 6-year-old, or it might have been 7 at that point, was just like, I was just devastated. I was like, he can't throw Daisy off the building. Like, what's he talking about? And I have to wait till the commercial and it comes back. I'm like, I don't know what to do. I remember being so into it, so into soaps. I just loved it. And
Do you watch any today?
I do not watch any current ones today. I was watching The Bold and the Beautiful on Paramount Plus because they had everything from 2013 on.
Oh,
So
wow.
I started watching that in 2013, and I watched over the years. I got to 2018, and now they've pulled it. Now all they have is the current season. So I was like, oh my god, what do I do? But what I do, I watch vintage ones. I watch CBS or The Bold and Beautiful. They are releasing The Bold and the Beautiful from the beginning on their official YouTube channel. So I started watching that last year. So I'm now in 1988 of Bold and the Beautiful. I watched that, and I watched As the World Turns, the way that you can on the internet through people's horrible VHS quality tapes.
I know. I wish we could watch them all. It would be quite amazing because
I do too. I know Procter and Gamble, I think, just didn't want to be, in the soap business, but I don't know how other people are. But if there was a way to watch that in high definition, I just give them my credit card. I just open my wallet, just take my money, just take it.
there's many fans who would.
Right?
I mean, I lost my job because P&G went out of the soap business, so
Right.
I understand very, very, very well. As I mentioned in the intro, you started writing at 7. How did you take pen to paper at 7?
I think it was my love of the soaps. I started writing. It was very short, and I'm sure it's just awful. I don't have any of it, but
I was going to ask if you did.
what I don't. What I do have, I found at my mom's when I moved all of my stuff finally out of there when I moved in with my husband. All her this stuff she'd kept up there. I did find there are some stuff that I wrote probably around more in grade school, like maybe 9 or 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are more like it was. I and all my friends had a detective agency as kids, in the neighborhood.
Charlie's Angels.
Exactly, right? And it was all just my actual friends that he did. And so like classic Doctor Who would air like at 6 p.m. on PBS. And those were all like 4-part stories or 6-part stories. So it would be every day also. So that's what I would write. I would write 4 or 6-part stories of this. And I've had some of them, and it's cute to go back and read them.
I bet. But and it's fascinating, being introduced to the soaps. And then you took a 20-year detour as an actor. Was it watching those soaps that encouraged you to become an actor, or was there something?
How that occurred because I always liked to sing. And so when I was in the band in junior high school, I played the trumpet with braces. Can you even imagine what that would have been like? You had to put like this wax over the braces so that you could play it. And after 2 years, I was like, I don't want to do that in high school. But they had the choir, so I joined the choir. From the choir, then I joined the show choir. And then there was like, look, you should do the musical. So I did the musical, and the English professor, the English teacher, Mrs. Parrott, who directed the plays, and she directed the musicals, but our choir director, was the musical director. I wasn't going to audition for the play. She tracked me down in the halls and sort of obviously shoved me up. I remember backed me up against a locker and said, the auditions are tomorrow. You're coming to this. So it's like, okay, I will. And so I did that, and I did a theater camp in between my junior and summer year up at Indiana State University in Terre Haute, Indiana. And they,
Oh,
at the
wow.
time, they had a professional summer stock company that had a lot of people from Chicago that came down. They had a lot of a tight repertory company that would, like, for 5, 6, 7 years, they all came
Mhm.
together. And I watched that. And of course, one of the people in it was the acting teacher there. And I was like, I could come to here and study from this person. And I was like, yes, I'm going to do that. And I did. And then it just went from there. And
That's
here
incredible.
we go.
And really, I love, um, through my show, hearing from people and they remember their teacher's name and the impact that teacher had. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
there are some pretty great teachers in the world who really have this incredible impact on a young person's trajectory in their
absolutely.
life.
Laura Riddle was the main acting teacher at in my undergrad. And then I was really blessed. I got my, oh, I think you said, I got my master's degree at the Actors Studio Drama School here in Manhattan. And so talk about working with some really great professors,
I
that
bet. I
that
bet.
program puts you through the ringer. That was like 3 years of boot camp.
What are
No.
some of the acting projects you're most proud of?
I'm most proud. I was only the fourth. I was either the fourth or the fifth person in the country to do this one-man play that had been on Broadway called "I Am My Own Wife" by Doug Wright. It starred Jefferson Mays, who's a big actor in New York, on Broadway, and it wasn't done a lot. But I think either the fourth or fifth production was the Indianapolis production, and I did that. And I did that because I was actually coming. I'd done Angels in America, another
Mhm.
show I'm proud of doing,
That
um,
is a great show.
right? At this theater called the Phoenix Theater in Indianapolis. Brian Fonseca, who we lost during COVID, was the artistic director. And I was coming in to do the Christmas show. And the person doing I Am My Own Wife, it's a one-man show where you play like 36 characters.
Wow.
And yeah. Yeah. And the actor who was playing it had kind of a breakdown, a nervous breakdown, and had to step out of it. And so, since I was coming in and Brian had already worked with me, he was like, "The show opens in 14 days. Do you think that you could do it?" And I went to the drama bookshop, and I got it and I read it. And by the time I got home, I called him back and I said, "No, Brian, I don't think anybody could do this in 14 days. If you could postpone it by a week, I'll
36
say,
parts.
like, name that tune, because I can name that tune in 3 minutes. Like, I could do this show in 21 days. That's what I'll say.
Wow, that's pressure.
Yeah,
Pressure.
yeah, it
Um,
was.
you were encouraged at the actor studio to create your own stories. Who was there someone specifically, or was that just part of sort of the curriculum?
The way the actor studio works is they take a large class of like 30 actors and they split you into 3 groups of 10 because they have 3 acting teachers and you have a different teacher each year. So
Hmm.
it depends on who you get in that first year. And I was lucky to have gotten, her name was Elizabeth Kemp. She is also no longer with us. She has a soap opera background. She was on with Christopher Reeve.
Search for Tomorrow?
No,
Elizabeth Kemp?
Love of My Life. Yeah, Elizabeth
Love
Kemp.
of Life.
Love of Life. That's what she was on.
Yeah.
She was on Love of Life. Yes.
Okay.
As a teenager, she was like 16 years old. Christopher Reeve was like 17 years old, and they were some little super couple.
She
Yeah.
studied under Lee Strasberg.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And she and Jacqueline Knapp were the co-artistic directors of the Actors Studio itself and the acting teachers at the school. So it was just terrifying. She puts you through this. It makes sense to me from an acting standpoint in the head, where you have to do several different 20-minute pieces, single solo pieces you create yourself. And the first one you have to do yourself, a private moment, something that you would do, only at home. She always says, I want to make it clear, I'm not talking about masturbating, just like, because we've had that done here before.
Oh God.
But you have
Yeah.
to talk aloud. And so I had to create a 20-minute piece. It's just myself, right? And so she does that because it's your words, it's yourself. It all comes from you. And so then the next step is you have to take a piece of art. You have to find a painting, and you have to make a story about that character that's in the painting, and do a 20-minute piece about that, with that. And then you have to take a real person. I did Freddie Mercury, and you have to do 2 stories. You have to do one of them as a child, and then one of them as an adult. So at that point, so with the picture, you're taking inspiration that some other artist has created, but you're still using your words and you're telling the story. And then she moves on to a real person. So now it's still your words, but now you're telling somebody else's story that exists, and you're just telling it like your way. And then from there, they finally give you a scene from a play. And it's, can you say this? Can you do this as honestly as you did back when everything came directly from you? It was your own life experience, and it was your own words and everything. And now that it's not a character you created, it's not words you've created, can you deliver that as authentically as you did before? And that made sense in my brain. It was fascinating, but also terrifying, because I'm not a writer and I don't create stuff. And it was it was terrifying. It was a terrifying year.
Did you have to find the painting?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That is incredible. Well, I mean, that was a precursor, because you say you weren't a writer. Well, you are a writer now. And as I was getting, say it again.
A storyteller is what I like to say.
Oh, okay. Well, you definitely
I'm a
are.
writer.
You definitely are a storyteller.
Thank you.
And knowing that you and I were sitting down today, I had a business trip recently, and I started listening to the Homos of Harmony Haven, and I was hooked immediately, and texted Andrew, I think, when I got off the plane. Truly, you really are a storyteller and know how to hook us in. You have had chronic depression and generalized anxiety, you say, your entire life. And you say that brought about the Homos of Harmony. How so?
It did. There was a friend, because it got, and I wasn't aware this was happening. My mother was like this. My grandmother was like this. And I've now learned that many of my cousins have suffered from depression and anxiety. Pardon me. It was just, when I got out of the actor studio, I had an agent, and I booked the first thing I did. And then because of a connection I made with somebody, I got onto Steven Soderbergh's television series on Cinemax. It was called The Nick with Clive Owen. And so having that right away, you just start auditioning a lot. So I was auditioning every single day, pounding the pavement and getting called back for stuff. And so and the anxiety that I have, it became overwhelming, having to actually go out at all that time. Even my third year of my final year, the third year at the actor's studio, there were times I skipped class simply because I couldn't leave the apartment. I just couldn't leave. The anxiety is so bad. But I wasn't admitting it to myself, because I had done so when I was younger, and all of the adults in my life either ridiculed me for it, or actually, got smacked, for it. It was the 70s, and the 80s. But we can get to that later. How it came about is that, so I can't act anymore. And a friend of mine, one day on the street, she just, as like a tough love yell at me, said, "You can't stop being a creative person just because you quit acting." And it hit me, and I was like, you're right.
Share her name.
Kimberly Fenwick. Should she be watching, will always be thankful. She will always be named as the impetus for this.
That's you should. I mean,
and I went home.
She gave you the smack on the backside you needed.
Exactly. I went home and I thought, well, what would you do? I was like, well, and I was back into watching the vintage soaps on YouTube. I was really big into Ryan's Hope at that point.
Okay.
I started watching that on SoapNet, and then SoapNet was defunct. but everything ended up on YouTube. So I was watching that daily. And I actually I started my own dog walking company because that was how I had supplemented income a lot in my 20s and 30s while I was, working my way up. And so I started listening to radio soaps. I found radio soaps you can find online. And so those are only 15 minutes. And I was like, yeah, just this tiny little bit. So I thought, well, that's what I love. And so I could write because I could do that at home. And I was like, what do you like? Well, you like soaps. And my impetus was we never had a 5-day a week LGBTQ daytime soap opera. And so I thought, well, how would that happen? How do you sit down? Because, they're all about the families. You've got to have the families. Like, how do you do that if they're gay? And so that's why I came up with
They are all about the families.
right.
And that is what I think many folks in soaps forget. And that is why people continue to watch them day after day after day.
Okay. Families and the friendships.
Mm-hmm.
Those are both. So I realized so she'd have to have an older gay man who had been in the closet, for a long time and had just, maybe come out.
I love that. Where did that idea come from? You had to have an older gay man who had been, because it really, you start with Sebastian and, it opens every door that you are telling story through because of that Sebastian being a closeted gay man who left his wife, it's just.
Right. And the young Alex, the 23-year-old who's attracted to him. So I'm like, you can do the May, December, or September. He's just 55. May, September, romance. But I thought, yes, it'd have to be that, and then he's very popular. He's a self-help person. So he had a talk show.
Self-help guru.
Self-proclaimed self-help guru.
But a very famous one.
Yes. And so he was closeted because in the 80s and even in the 90s, I believe, he wouldn't have been able to have been out, and done what he did. But eventually he did come out. And so, of course, a little bit like Grace and Frankie, Victoria, his wife, she did not handle that well.
Oh, yeah. That's so fascinating.
It was before
because I didn't even think of Grace and Frankie because of, also I'm not visually seeing anything.
Right.
So, but yes, I mean, it is very Grace and Frankie now that you articulate that.
And I started before Grace and Frankie, I'm pretty sure, or at least before I started watching it. But it's that same kind of thing, So of course she's a little bitter. It's her whole life she invested in this man, and now she's 50, whatever. And he's like, hey, I'm gay. I'm sorry, I'm leaving you for our best friend, David, who we all knew and loved. I started writing out, and I just like, that's how you would do. It's like, okay, so he could have kids, and so the kids are gay, the one, of course, the eldest brother, the cop, he's a heterosexual. But Savannah,
William the cop.
The cop is the heterosexual. And at the beginning it was switched. Savannah was the cop and was a lesbian, and William was the alcoholic chef. And a heterosexual. But I quickly realized, the more interesting character is the alcoholic chef. Like, that's who I want to see. So I was like, I should make that character gay, one of the homos. Like, if we're going to have a heterosexual, but our token hetero, have the straight-laced cop. You want to have the off-the-wall alcoholic. That's the lesbian. That's the gay. That's the homo.
I wish I had this picture because I have a photo of this. Ellen Wheeler and the writers, I think I was at Ellen Wheeler's apartment, and they had all of the stories mapped out on the wall with like Post-its.
Sure.
And I'm thinking, like, how did you do that? Like, what were you doing, like, to map out your...
So I started out just sort of thinking, like I said, about all that. And then what happened, there's something called National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo for short. And so what you do is write 1,611 words a day for 30 days, and that's 50,000 words, which is what's considered a novel. So I thought, you know what? Why don't I do this? Because I'll just pump it out. It'll just force me to write, and then I'll go back and look at what I have afterwards. And I knew we'd have to. I did a lot of research on YouTube. I watched Santa Barbara's first episode. I watched Ryan's Hope first episode. I watched first episodes of like every soap that I could find daytime to see like, how do you start this? And how do you introduce them? Because like you said, it starts with Sebastian and Alex, and then the second episode introduces Sebastian's son. The third one introduces his daughter. The fourth one introduces Victoria, the ex-wife. So they kind of build.
You always have to watch the ex-wife.
Oh, she's such a favorite of so many people.
Yeah, you always have to watch the.
Yes.
She's in my mind, she's a Joan Collins.
Mine as well. He is, in fact, at some point when I really start to get in Victoria's voice, sometimes I think her accent is a little bit transatlantic, like they used to call in the 1950s. The movie stars had a transatlantic accent, because in my head, it's either Joan Collins or Stephanie Beacham. It's either Sable or it's, that. But it's also Lucinda.
100% Lucinda.
Yes.
It's also Alexandra Spaulding.
Yes.
Beverly McKinsey.
I know Beverly McKinsey. But that, yes, it's exactly that type of person.
Yeah.
So I sat down and I created, because as an actor, I would do this for all my characters. I created backstories I went back and did the whole family from the time they were children, what their whole life was like. And what was really interesting about that is that there were all sorts of nuggets where it's like, well, all you have to do is bring back that ex-boyfriend from college, you know what I mean? And you have a whole story. Like, I can just mine this for years. I had the Bible, the soap opera Bible, as they said.
God, I hope a lot of writers are watching this right now, because they can learn a lot from you, Andrew.
Well, I learned a lot from Doug Marland. I was watching his As the World Turns time. I learned a lot from Hogan Sheffer, his time. I learned a lot.
Two amazing writers.
Agnes Nixon.
I did not know Douglas. I knew his work, but I worked with the brilliant Hogan.
Yeah. Agnes Nixon, of course, when I was really young, All My Children. Donna Swajewski was another major influence for her time on Another World. That was, she was my late.
I know Donna well.
Did
you read Agnes's book, by the way?
I didn't.
You should.
Okay, I should.
It's a great book.
I'll make a point to do that.
I love that you created a Bible. I love that you created backstory. That is, I mean, that is truly how you do it right.
I agree. I mean, like I said, as an actor, that's what I would do for any character I had. So,
do you bounce ideas off of anyone?
Yes, I had a real one of my. In fact, it's Allison Moody, who is the voice at the beginning, who introduces the podcast, who teaches voice. Linklater teaches voice at the University of Illinois.
Great voice. I love that it's the same voice. Fantastic.
Yeah, sure, I thought, and that was something also, again, just researching podcasts. They said your podcast sounds more professional if you get a third party to introduce it. And so
I'm learning a lot by listening.
So as a voiceover artist, I was like, hey, would you want to do this? And so I first shared it with just a few friends to see, hey, what is this?
You shared the written form.
Mm-hmm. And daily. I was like, I like 5 of my closest friends, like, could you commit to reading it once a day? I have 25 episodes, 5 days for 5 weeks, and give me feedback. And I asked them questions. I had like a Google Doc thing for them to ask. And what surprised me so much is what many of them said, because they're your best friends. So, they're going to be kind. But when we got to the end of it, I heard from more than one that was like, you know what? I miss it. It's like, it's been a week since I've had it. And I'm like, I got used to reading it with my coffee in the morning, and I actually miss it. I think you have something. And then I reached out to friends of friends, who would be more honest. And I was shocked at some of them that became obsessed with it. Even my husband at one point Our friend Brooks, I don't know if Brooks will watch this later. She's works at Scholastic, and
Mhm.
she's a very illiterate human being. And I was like, I don't know how she's going to take this. And she became completely obsessed. And that was when my husband went, maybe you do have something here if Brooks is really into this. Um, but also the name, it's how I got the name. I originally just called it Harmony Haven because that was the name of the town. And my friend Allison,
Which again is perfection for a town, a soap town.
and I came up with that by literally just going on Google Maps and just in the middle of the country and just looking at town names. And I think I saw Haven first. I was like, that's great. Haven. It's got to be something Haven. And then I saw a town called Harmony. I was like, Harmony Haven. There you go. That's the town. And she was over and I was sitting talking to her. And I said to her one day, I said, the Homosexuals of Harmony Haven is too long of a title, right? And she volleyed back to me, the Homos of Harmony Haven. And I was like, ding, ding, ding. That's absolutely the title. It's absolutely the title. And I can't tell you when it was written. I was interviewed on some podcasts in that format. And everybody said, yeah, that title, as soon as I saw the Homos of Harmony Haven, like I had to look it up. Like, is that a real thing? Like, what? That's such a ridiculous name. So that's how I came up with that. The stories I'd bounce off Allison, read a lot. She'd read them over and over. I had two groups of beta readers, friends who would read it, but she really helped because she's a writer also. She's an actress, writer, now teaches voice. And she would help me get the voices right, and help to separate them and help me with stories. But for the most part, the stories I kept to myself because I wanted to get real reactions. I don't want people to know what the
Right.
twist.
What was coming?
Yeah, like
Yeah, you want it. The
you're
best
about,
part of soap operas back in the day before social media was being surprised.
right. And even though I don't know, I had Martha Byrne had and Trent was in it. Trent Dawson. Wait, they had a pilot, and Allison Smith. You knew they did that pilot. Wait, and
Oh yeah, I watched. Oh yeah. I
yeah,
totally blanked what that was, but
a long
yes,
time ago, right?
yeah, yes, yeah. It was
And
fantastic.
yeah, I had given enough of a donation, to help them do it. That I had martinis with Martha, so we met.
Oh, that's great.
We did the thing. Um, what was my point was though that she.
Speaking of Martha and Allison, I would love to get them together since they were best friends. Have them
Uh,
here. Have
you
them
should have them
here.
here, yes.
Yeah, together.
Yeah, yeah. I enjoyed that. I can't remember what I was going to say about Mark. I can't remember.
But you
Um,
had cocktails with Martha, which is a fun.
with
Having
Mark,
cocktails with Martha is always fun.
always fun. Yeah, I don't remember what the point was. What I was talking about before that. How I came up with the name something. I don't know.
Well, doing research. You were watching Wait.
I was watching it. Well, and I was watching As the World Turns Now again at this time.
Yeah.
Doug Marland years. I was watching.
What was your favorite of what you were watching of the Doug Marland period?
Well, the John Wesley ship, of course. The
Douglas Cummings.
That Douglas Cummings story is so great. And not all of it exists. You don't get it all.
Right.
But I have my 40th anniversary book, which somebody gave me of As the World Turns.
Mine is right behind the computer.
Yeah. So I could read that to fill in the gaps, of stuff that was missing. That was great. The Iva.
With Martha Byrne.
Yeah, that my husband who just comes in and out of soaps, he's not really into them, but they're on, so he's in and out of the room. I'm watching it before he's getting ready for work, and I remember him one day going, "Does Lily still not know who her mother is?" Because it's been like 8 months, and it was like, no, it was like, and doesn't everyone else in the town know? I was like,
Yeah.
yes. Like, how does she not know? Because they're all blackmailing each other with the information, so no one's telling her. And that moment. Also rest in peace, Lisa Brown, of that. Get away from her. She's your baby.
It is, and
Brilliant.
it is, and and that I said this to John Wesley Shipp the other day. I mean, it is incredible of Douglas Marland's genius that he created Kelly Nelson and Douglas Cummings, these two iconic characters that decades, and I'm talking decades after they left the canvas, that people still remember them,
And talk about
treasure them. And the same with Nola Reardon and Iva Snyder, two, these iconic characters. 100%.
All of them, Lisa.
Lily Walsh.
Doug Martin didn't create Lisa, but come on, Lisa. Don.
Lily Walsh.
Kim Hughes. Everybody, yeah. Lily, Rose. Rose was my favorite. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Now I remember the Martha Byrne connection. Because I said to her, I was like, you were talking about there weren't spoilers back then. Even then, I must not have been, I didn't really like spoilers. I just like to watch the show. Had no idea. If you ever want to watch As the World Turns or anything, mute for like 30 seconds now. Had no idea they were going to kill Rose. I just watched that happen live. And I will always remember, I said to her, and she said it back to me, she was like, John Dixon saying the poison is hitting her, and her internal organs are beginning to shut down. And I was like, well, you can't. Like this show, As the World Turns, with this writer, Hogan Shepard's like, you can't say that line and have them come back. Like, she's dying. And then I started watching the scenes with Lucinda and Emmett. Everyone was like, oh, these are goodbye scenes. They're going to kill her off. And by the end of the episode, she was dead. And I was like, that was the last great big surprise of soaps for me.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's so hard to keep things quiet these days. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when you released this, you released it first in written form, correct?
I did. Yes. And I'll tell you, like we just said, I don't really do podcasts. I also don't really do audiobooks, but everybody was asking me, when are you going to make this podcast? When are you going to make this, an audiobook, whatever? And I was like, well, you don't understand. I live on one of the busiest streets in Brooklyn with two dogs who bark at every sound that they hear. I can't, there's no time I could record this. It would take so long to edit out the dog and the horns honking. I mean, it was so loud. But we moved during the pandemic, we moved up to Westchester County, and we're in a tiny little hamlet, halfway between two of the Metro North lines. And it was a December, and it was late at night, and I was down here in the basement, and I was like, it's so quiet down here. It's like, oh my God, like I could record that. And you're reading it, so it starts in January, it starts in the middle of winter, and there's a Valentine's episode. I think you must have got to that. You sent the note, right? So it's meant to start, in January. So I had 25 days to figure out how to do a podcast, how to use the software, how to get the art, how do you promote it, where do you even, all of that. I had to do it so quickly. That's why even where you are, there's still technical difficulties. It gets more professional as it goes along.
Oh my God, it sounds so professional. I'm jealous of how professional. I want this to be much like yours. When you decided to record it, did you know that you would do it all?
Yeah, I'd have to, because I don't have any money to pay anybody. It was like, it can just be me. There's no way I could do that. And I mean, the cast, eventually balloons. There's like 20 people, because Allison was like, I mean, I have to be Savannah. I'd do it for free. We can find people who do it for free. I was like, I know, but the logistical nightmare of actually getting all of those people to record,
you probably couldn't do it daily because of what you need.
No.
What you need to coordinate would be very difficult. But I think having you do it is another genius thing. Like I don't listen much to podcasts, so I don't know if there are a lot of storytelling ones like yours that do it with one individual. Like I was sharing about David Gregory, Powder Burns,
right.
David is in it and John Wesley Shipp is in it. And, Ed Asner is in it. Like they have, they have, a cast,
right.
And, the production of that
video drama. Right.
Yeah. And, again, and maybe I just haven't given myself enough opportunity to listen to others, but I know, like I said to you earlier backstage, I have to rewind because my mind goes elsewhere. And, And in your series, which is also great that they're short, I still don't want to miss something.
Right.
So that's really fantastic. Do you have a favorite character to write for?
No, that's like Sophie's Choice. That's like picking a child. I mean, I will say I love Victoria. I love writing for Victoria. I love Savannah. Such a hot mess. And there's so many of my friends who are in their 20s or 30s. They're like, yeah, Savannah's my homegirl. Like that's
I
I'm
love that. Well, I read your description. There's blackmail, murder, social issues, laughter, and gratuitous sex. Something for
yes,
everyone.
everybody. Yeah, she'll get to and that was very important to me because that's what a soap opera does, right? You deal with social issues. It's what they dealt with divorce for the first time. They dealt with abortion for the first time, because the censors weren't
Yeah.
as strong because the kids were not at home. This was for housewives. Doug Marland was the first, right? Hank Elliott was the first gay character.
Yes, I love
And
Hank Elliott.
Luke was the first,
Gay child.
yeah, of a super couple.
Mm-hmm.
I actually, who Kim Zimmer's son played him first
Jake Weary. Yeah.
when he got sore-assed. If anyone knows what soap opera rapid aging syndrome. But watching that, I kind of thought, oh, it'd be really interesting if Luke was gay. Like they'd never do it, but like to have Holden and Lily, your main super couple, and have their child be gay and tell
Yeah.
that story. And then they did it with Van. I was like, oh, it was amazing. Yeah.
And Van was fantastic in the
He
role.
sure was. He sure was.
He really was. Well, the response that, you've read some responses on air, and I saw what you posted yesterday, which I wanted to read. Hi, Andrew. I'm so glad to be supporting your show. I remember looking for a new podcast audiobook that wasn't overly cheesy or had a redundant theme. I just opened Apple Podcasts and ended up finding your show. But you, darling, are an amazing writer in my best Victoria voice. I binged the entire show on a road trip to North Carolina over the summer. I love how there's always a twist that you don't see coming. I also wanted to say that I love Jerry's storyline. As someone who is non-binary and has considered transitioning, one of my concerns was about how I would be seen by friends and family. And with Victoria's response, it definitely puts things into perspective for me, especially having that discussion with my mom and siblings. So thank you. I would also like to read your other works that you may have. That's got to be quite a nice feeling.
It was. It was really touching. I don't hear a lot from podcast people. I've started to recently. The listeners have started to write and give me feedback, but and I'd never heard anyone the transgender storyline, and I was so terrified to write a transgender storyline because it's not my experience, and there's such pressure if you're writing, like the original, not the original British Queer as Folk, but the American Queer as Folk. So many people gave it a hard time because it's not representing every quality of every gay man. But I wanted to do a trans storyline, and I watched, shows, and I read stories, and I talked to people online, and I realized that my like as an actor, you're like, how is your into the character? My into that storyline is that it needed to be a coming out storyline because that's something I understand. Whether you're coming out as gay, you're coming out as lesbian, you're coming out as trans, it's the same fear, it's the same anxiety, it's the same process.
Anxiety, all right.
Yeah. So that was how I knew I was going to tell that storyline. And that's a big spoiler. It's told in such a soap opera way. If you continue to listen to it, I can't wait to hear.
I will. How many episodes have there been?
I'm almost at 600.
Oh,
I've written.
God.
It's a year, and there's like 255 a year. That's how many you
yes, that's how many we used to produce. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, so I'm about ready to hit 600.
Good for you. That is incredible.
Yeah. Thank you. Really. I'm going to warn you because you said, about my mind wanders. You don't know yet. You're just going to get there when you get to the engagement party, and right after that, something happens, and at that point, you'll learn. People didn't learn for a while. You actually have to listen to every single thing because I dangle like a shiny carrot for you to pay attention to, and then I use that. I slip in the piece of information.
I'm sending this to every writer I know when we're done.
I put in the clue, and writers would say like, "Oh, I remember when that happened, but I didn't even think about that." Like it was just such a throwaway line. And so it was terrifying for me was you get through this first puzzle. There's a puzzle that starts about around episode 50, and around episode 100 it's released. So I've now trained my audience. Oh, we have to listen to everything he's doing because
Good.
it's or anything. And then I did a murder mystery after I'd already trained them to pay so much attention. So it's like, crap, now I have to do a murder mystery where they're already trained. Now I've got to pay attention to all the clues. So how do I do that and do that well?
Well, like you said earlier, this, there was never an LGBT focused soap opera. And I really visually, in my mind, listening to your story, can see this as a TV series.
I'd love to. I don't know how we could make it happen, but
well, that's for people listening and for you and I to talk about later. But I want to save some time because you are working, and this is a more serious subject for those listening, but you are working to end the stigma of mental illness.
yeah.
And can you talk about how the stigma almost took your own life at age 46?
Yeah. So what happened was, like I said, I had all this behavior as a child, and I had blocked it out because all the adults either ridiculed me or my dad would physically, hit me. So I learned at a really early age, this is not something you're supposed to talk about. So I also block it out of my head. But it's part of my journey in that, because one of my coping skills was to make people laugh around me. Because if people are laughing, they're not mad at you. If they're laughing because, they're not laughing at you, they're laughing because you're doing something funny. And so it's helped me keep my sense of humor through all of this. But what happened was,
which is really important.
It's very important. I don't know how you could do it without. I've discovered the way I found out I have this. I'm starting to call it neurological disorder because that's actually what it is. One of them is a neurological disorder. The way a lot of people do is I developed irritable bowel syndrome. And with that, I had to stop drinking. And I was drinking a lot at that point. And I'd always knew my life got better at 19. At 19, I came out and I became more active in the theater community. And I always thought that's what it was. I started drinking at 19. And it works like a benzodiazepine. It relaxes. It takes the anxiety away. But it's painful for people with IBS. So I had to quit drinking. And within a year, my behavior as a child came back. And then I remembered the behavior as a child. And I was like, oh my God, I thought this was behind me. I can't be like this again. I cannot live like this again. There were moments on the street, dog walking. I'm dog walking in Brooklyn and having this disorder. There were two instances I remember. If I had had a gun, I would have shot the person because I was in such a state of fight or flight. I felt so threatened. I would have shot them. God knows what happened in my life. I was hiding under blankets, like I was coming home and hiding under the blanket and then blocking that out of my head. Because how do you tell people, hey, I had to hide under a blanket for 2 days, for 2 hours today. I remember I had to pull myself together. Like, your husband's coming home from work in like an hour. You have to pull yourself together. But then I blocked that out of my head, remembered it 2 months later when things were so bad. I wanted to throw myself out my window. I lived on a 4th-story window. I did not watch Melrose Place at the time. I missed it. I'm watching that now also. And Marcia Cross, Kimberly, she has cancer and she's just tried to throw herself off into the ocean, to kill herself. She couldn't do it at the last second. And she said to herself, you coward. And I remember thinking the same thing. You're so incompetent and such a coward. You can't even you can't even end your own life. You can't even, it's horrible, but I did. And I called my best friend and I couldn't even speak. I was just crying, and he kept trying to talk to me. And finally he said, okay, I'm coming over. He's in Manhattan. I'm in Brooklyn. He's like, I'm getting on a train. I'll be there don't do anything. I'll be there in 40 minutes, It was really bad. Luckily, I had a core group of friends I could talk to. My husband is the most understanding person. I don't know. 'Cause I know what it's like to live with someone who goes through this because my mother was like this. And it is really difficult to live with somebody where you don't know how are they gonna be in fight or are they gonna be in flight, you know? I'm
Mhm.
either really anxious or I'm aggressive. So, and I'm say it's a neurological disorder, because of these headaches that I get, the migraines. Um, I had hit my head a couple of times, and my therapist said, "You should probably just have an MRI now that you have health insurance, um, just to make sure there's nothing else going on." And the neurologist saw right away. They don't know why, but because your brain is mostly gray matter. But what they see in people who have migraines, in each hemisphere, there's a bright light in each hemisphere, and that's what they see in people who have migraines. Pardon me, which is a neurological disorder. This next thing he said to me, he said, "Is are you on a benzodiazepine?" And for people who don't know, those are things like Xanax, Valium, Ativan, Klonopin. And I said, "Yes, I have been for a couple of years now." And he said, "Well, you'd have to be." He said, "Because I can see your amygdala is pumping out so much adrenaline and cortisol." So he told me something I didn't know. Our brains make a natural benzodiazepine, and that's to balance out the adrenaline and cortisol the amygdala is putting out. So it keeps you in balance. But if you were camping and you turned and you suddenly saw a bear running towards you, your amygdala would take over and throw out so much adrenaline and cortisol that you're, in that state. "Oh, I got to fight or I got to run." And so that's what I'm in constantly because my amygdala is constantly pumping that out. And so he said, "Yeah, your brain can't make enough of the benzo to counteract that. Naturally, you'd have to take one." And when I started therapy, what's the word? I resisted going on benzodiazepines for a year. Um, but things were just so bad. I was like, you know what? I'll try it. I'll try Xanax. And I remember the first time I took it, and the calmness
Mm.
and the, oh, I wonder, Alan, I don't play the game too often, but if I'd just been diagnosed in my 20s, or my 30s, what life could have been like,
Mhm.
coming out of the actor studio and having the career that was starting if I hadn't had the overwhelming anxiety I had a way to treat it.
Well,
Um,
that's why, I think you mentioned to me that you're open to talking about it because there is a stigma. And I thought of you yesterday. I was watching The View, and I don't know if you saw Kit Harrington on The View yesterday.
I didn't. I've done a new thing where I've stopped paying attention to the news. I used to watch The View every day, and I quit watching that too, so I'm not getting the news right now to see how it helps my mental health.
Yeah,
So I
that's fun. I can totally understand that. But Kit Harrington from Game of Thrones was talking and saying that the biggest killer to men under 45 is suicide.
yeah,
And it is because men do not speak about these issues.
right,
And
and
he
therapy.
himself was struggling after Game of Thrones ended. And how therapy and getting help helped him. And it really is nothing for anybody to be afraid of to
Or
get
ashamed of,
help.
right, or ashamed of, because we do still
Right.
shame people. Like, you'd never shame somebody with cancer,
No.
and you'd never tell somebody I always say, you'd never tell someone who is paralyzed, "Well, you stand up and you put one leg in front of the other, and then another leg." That's what I do. But people are like, you just, breathe and just, it's the
Mhm.
whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, and you just go out and you just do it anyway. You know what I mean? But no one would say that to with a physical disorder that you can see. And one of the most crucial things I learned and that I want to discuss and talk about is that part of it is because we all walk around saying, "I'm so depressed."
Mm.
"Hey, I'm so depressed today." You're not depressed. We're not depressed. We're sad today. My psychiatrist taught me that happiness and sadness are moods that come and go. You're sad for a day. You're sad for a couple of days. Depression is a state of being that lasts
Mm.
for weeks, months, years, decades. So something that had I not gone through it myself, I would not have understood. You can be incredibly happy and severely depressed at the same time. because depression's not the opposite of happiness. Sadness is the opposite of happiness. Depression is a way. So, for instance, we moved up here, and I got out of the city, which we knew I had. I had to do. I couldn't live in the city anymore, and I was really happy. We have this huge yard, German Shepherd. Love to play with the dog. It's so quiet. This basement down here has no windows, so I feel like I'm in a cave. I feel very relaxed. Um, and I recognized, but at the same time, I didn't really have any hope for the future. And I was thinking of myself not as a 50-year-old man, but more like I was an 80-year-old man, because I was just like, I'm going to be dead in a year now. I'm just waiting to die, essentially, because I just am assuming that's going to happen soon. And my psychiatrist is like, that's depression. That's not being sad. That's, and how long is this going? I was like, well, this is like 2 months. It's like, yeah, that's depression. And, I was already on Prozac, but we had to up the medication by 20 milligrams, and it just changed. It's such a game changer.
Well, and that's people's adverse reaction to medication as well. If you are in a state of depression and there is, something that can help you, I mean, just to think of, who you were or where you were at the moment you thought you wanted to throw yourself out the window to where you are at this moment with me,
it's still tough. I had a little suicidal thing that or late last year. Didn't follow through, but it was strong. I'm in therapy now, so we can talk about it. And I've got my loving husband. And actually, you know what he did? Just to say because I actually, well, we'll talk about this. I don't want to. The New York Times did an article, and they named it. I couldn't remember it, but there is a website out there that people discuss that will tell you exactly how you can end your own life painlessly, and it goes step by step. It's just a substance you can very easily order off of Amazon.
The New York Times shared that. Is that what you
Yeah,
just said?
it was because it was a whole thing about it was in the air. Like, this website shouldn't be out there, and they did actually name the website, which they later said we probably shouldn't have done that. It got taken down, the website, but it got put back up because now it's all like, this is hypothetical. No one's like doing whatever. But I figured out how I could end my own life painlessly, and I'm like, I could do it. I could rent a hotel room, do it in the hotel, lock the door with a so it can't be opened, but so whoever housekeeping is coming in could see a note that says, someone in here has ended their own life. Please don't come in. Contact 911, so that, because I didn't want anyone to have to find my body. Like, I don't want my husband to find my body, anything like that, when I seriously think about it. And what he said to me was, it doesn't matter what you do. I'll have to come down and identify the body. And that sticks in my head so much, where I'm like, yeah, I couldn't, in my darkest stuff, I can't do that to him.
Well, that's sadly, because it is a disease, it is a disease that we have to continue to talk about, and need people like yourself, Andrew, to talk about what you're going through, and educate people, and keep that thought about Joe in your mind, because when you mentioned hotel room, I automatically thought of Twitch from the Ellen DeGeneres show, who went to a hotel room, left his wife and 3 children, and heartbreaking, and you would never want Joe to have to identify,
Right, which I
and
didn't even think about, because what happens in the brain, I remember, and I called my friend Carl when the moment it happened, because I was sitting there and I had a thought, and the thought was, Joe would be much better off without you around, and that that's true. And I had that thought, and I was like, whoa, that's frightening. And I called Carl, to tell him, I just had this thought, like, here's what's, I had to say, here's what's been going on with me. And the reason, I think it kind of hurt my husband because I didn't share with him for quite a while. But he was working at Time Warner right when AT&T bought it. But then Donald Trump became elected, and he tried to make it not happen. So it was 2 years of, are we going to get laid off? Are we going to whatever? And I was going through this when it was like any day now, they were going to get the word that it's gone through and these are the people being let go. And so I was like, I can't put this on him right now with everything he's going through. I can't tell him, hey, I'm thinking of killing myself. Like, I can't do that. I even apologized to Carl. I said to him, I'm sorry for what I'm about to tell you, because I don't want you to have to take this on. And I remember him saying to me, listen, later when we'd seen Betty Buckley at the Public Theater and had been drinking. And as we're walking to the station, he said, listen, you're never a burden. Don't ever worry about calling or telling me or saying anything like that. That's not a burden for me to take on. I'm blessed to have really close friends. And like I said, the most angelic husband ever.
Well, and that's what I would like to stress is there are hundreds of Carls out there.
I hope
for anyone.
I hope people have
right. There definitely are that people don't necessarily will pick up the phone. They are afraid to pick up the phone, but it is more important to pick up that phone and call your Carl and ask for help, or a professional. Seriously, it is more important. You are worthy. Right.
I mean, there's always someone that you can talk
to. Trevor Project. I was a Lifeline counselor. The Trevor Project. All of the above. Andrew, continue to work on your mental health.
Thank you.
Continue writing this brilliant The Homos of Harmony Haven. Really.
All right.
And I hope you continue to speak out about this stigma, because it is important. It's ridiculous that my parents were Holocaust survivors. I wish mental health was made available to them after the war,
of course,
at a time where millions needed help.
And
so there's
me about us as a country is that because the way our healthcare system is set up, if you don't have health insurance, a psychiatrist is completely unaffordable, a psychologist is completely unaffordable, and the medicine is completely unaffordable. It's barely affordable with health insurance, and that's a frustrating thing for me. And I don't know how to change that.
We need government to, fight for cheaper healthcare and cheaper access, or make access more available to those who desperately. I mean, this mental illness is really why we continually see shooting after shooting after shooting after shooting.
Right.
It's
like I said. I had a couple of things I can remember. Had I had a gun on the street, I would have shot. There are 2 people I can think of because I felt so under attack.
I can't thank you enough for coming by today.
I can't thank you enough for having me.
It is my pleasure. I didn't even get to ask you, what shows of The Locher Room did you enjoy?
Oh my gosh. Well, everything As the World Turns. I mean, that was the first, the one with them all, that first one. I watched all of those. Because like I said, I think I told you, I really enjoyed the 90s crew that you got together, Yvonne Perry and Allison Taylor and Kirk.
Judson Mills and Tom Wiggin.
All of them. But and it was fun because that's where I was at the time. I was watching the mid-90s, but I got a ton of spoilers from listening to that interview. I was like, darn it, I wish I didn't have that spoiled for me. So if it's a soap I don't watch, like I'm just started watching Guiding Light. Like I won't watch those because I don't want to get spoiled. The other one I loved was Melrose Place, that Melrose Place reunion. They were fascinating. I remember them talking about having 2 different sets.
Wait,
Uh,
not Melrose. Did I do a Melrose?
You did a Melrose. You sure did do a Melrose.
No.
Early on in the pandemic. I don't know who else would have been. It had to have been the Locker Room.
I don't know. I didn't do one.
Who else
But
would have done that?
it was I know who you're talking, but I can't think of who it is at the moment. It's the Broadway guy. I'm blanking.
Oh, Seth Rudetsky did that.
Yeah.
I'm interesting.
I
In
was
my
like,
brain,
wait, I'm like,
in my
am
head,
I? Yeah. So I'm putting this up right now because
please.
Ragged Saint reminded me. So you can always dial if you need help. Thank you for suggesting that. National Suicide and Crisis Hotline for anybody. It really is. Caitlin says this has been amazing. Love you, Andrew. Caitlin Samuel.
Samuel, that's a friend of mine. She's been listening from the beginning, reading.
Good.
That's nice. Sweet. That's sweet to have you on. Thanks for coming on and joining. One I loved of yours, though, was the Catherine Hayes tribute.
Yeah,
that was great for several different reasons.
Her.
One, because it was so touching, but number 2, nobody else could see it. But I'm watching Don Hastings the whole time at the bottom of the screen going,
oh, yeah, I didn't know.
and no one's no. I'm like, oh, poor Don. He can't hear. Don can't hear. Somebody help Don.
That is so funny. You'll appreciate this. Antonio Reyes is coming on soon.
Oh, fantastic. I think I might have.
Yeah.
Have you published that already?
No, I haven't. I
Okay.
haven't. No. He's
Okay.
I think March, but yeah, I'll promote it. Andrew, thank you so much. We'll do this again when this is a series.
Let's do it.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. Thanks everybody for watching. I want to thank Andrew for joining. Please check out the Homos of Harmony Haven on your favorite streaming platforms. Join me on Wednesday, February 8th, when up-and-coming actress Danny Guevara joins me live. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, you can do so down below. Turn on the notifications for reminders of all upcoming shows. And if you like today's episode, click the like button. It helps. And don't forget, you can stream The Locker Room on your favorite streaming platform. Just search The Locker Room and download your favorite episode. Have a great weekend, everybody. Please stay safe, and I will see you next week.